Hi everyone, lovely to see you all, really great to be here. Yes, the last couple of 3 years I've been doing a PhD on menstruation in organisational contexts in the business school at Monash in Melbourne, near Melbourne. And I've done 2 case studies and one of them is on menstrual cup use, and that's what I'm talking about today. The talk's divided into 2 halves. The first half I'm talking about the journey of research that I went through, the actual process I went through. Seeing as we're a research group, I thought that would be of interest. And the second half is more a discussion on my findings. So the background to this is that there's very little research. There's very little research on menstrual cup use in the global north. Most of the research has been done in developing countries. For example, in the last couple of years, there's been at least 7 papers come out, and they've all been on menstrual cup use in Africa. So we know very little about the use of menstrual cups in the global north, but we know that we need sustainable solutions to the ways that we use menstrual products. And I did some preliminary research online, looking at social media and also running focus groups, which showed that menstrual cups in a certain cohort were rapidly becoming cool. So I was interested in studying young women's experience of cup uptake. And one of my research questions was that menstrual cups are sometimes positioned as a radical departure to conventional products, but are they really? So the context was that I did this study in Melbourne. For those of you who haven't been there, Melbourne's a major city approaching 5 million inhabitants. It's the most progressive city in Australia. It's the most left-wing and the most green city. And I studied a group of undergraduates in a high-ranked university located right in the centre of Melbourne. And I did this between 2017 and 2018, at a time when environmentalism and menstrual activism were both in ascendance, particularly among that age group. So it's a case study. It's a bounded study positioned in a broader context. And it's a small qualitative study, a diary-based study. So participants kept a diary over the first 3 menstrual cycles of their use of the cup. And then I did a follow-up interview with them individually using semi-structured questions. The cohort were aged 20 to 24 years old. They had to be living in the city at the time of the study. They were undergraduates or recent graduates, and they had never used a menstrual cup before. So this is the process that we went through, and you'll see that it's quite lengthy. So the first thing that happened was that I knew a gender studies professor at this university. I purposefully chose to do my research at another university to the one I worked at, because that helps with ethics approval, obviously, because you're much less likely to run into a student of yours in the cohort, so those things don't get mixed up. And she sent out an email to her students saying that somebody she knew was running a study on menstrual cups and that they would get a free menstrual cup. So from that email, they had to email me expressing interest, and I had 44 emails within 24 hours. Some of them were not from young women in that group, but from their friends, and someone pretty immediately had put it on Facebook as well. So I was very quick to get interest in the study. Then I sent them an info sheet and a consent form, and then if they agreed to that, they sent back the completed consent form. And then they had to arrange to collect the menstrual cup on campus, which we made as easy for them as possible. And then they had to self-experiment with the cup, keeping a diary for 3 cycles. And of course, 3 cycles is not the same as 3 months, especially as quite a few of the cohort were on hormonal medication of one sort or another that either meant they weren't menstruating regularly or they were skipping periods. So for some of them, it actually took them 8 or 9 months to have 3 cycles. So that was actually quite interesting, really, to see that that's quite a shift in the way people are experiencing their cycles. And then once they had completed the 3 cycles, they either emailed the diary or if they'd done it in hard copy, they brought it with them. And then they had to make an appointment and come for an interview with me. So how did that actually work out? Well, so there were 44 women who initially expressed interest, and 22 of those got as far as actually collecting a free cup. So 22 collected a menstrual cup, and out of that 22, 11 completed the study. And at one point I was stuck at around 6 or 7, so I did a snowballing effort to get another group of participants. And snowballing, if you're not familiar with that term, is when you use your original participants and ask them if they would refer the study to friends of theirs and to their networks. So that brought in another, so I actually had another round in that. So I ended up with 11 completing. And through this process, I sent 425 individual emails. So you see how much work is involved in actually getting 11 people. So that gave me the following data to be analysed: 11 interviews which I had professionally transcribed and 11 diaries. And I started off using a conventional analytical technique of coding from the transcripts, but I realised I was missing data because I was doing that. And actually there was a lot of data in the actual recordings that got flattened by the transcribing process. So I did another set of analysis where I listened to the recordings again and coded, well not coded, but noted affect. So I ended up with another analysis that was around the affect. And I felt that was very important with a stigmatized topic because women spoke very differently at different times during the interviews depending on whether they felt confident or not. And it was very stark that when women were, often when they were talking about their symptomatology, when they were talking about their experiences of pain or difficulty, they would become noticeably less confident. And the same thing also happened in the menstrual workplace study that I did. So then I did an iterative analysis of both sets of data in both modes. So I was going backwards and forwards between the two different sets of analysis and both the interview data and the diary data. Okay, so what did I find? So I'm just going to give you a few quotes that are illustrative of the overall group. Everybody in the study talked about the environment. Everybody spoke about that the thing that had attracted them to using a menstrual cup was its environmental impact. And this was often talked about in the context of their peer group. So this group of young women were very aware that what they were doing was socially sanctioned by their peers. And that more than that, it actually was cool. So several of them used the word cool, and several of them spoke about how they had excitedly talked about it with their friends. And the second element that they talked about, apart from the broad sustainability impact, in which I also included thrift, because they would talk about how it was cheaper as well. So there's broad sustainability and also that it was convenient. And I was very interested in the use of the word convenient and how big a concept convenience was for them, because I couldn't remember when I was that age being particularly concerned about convenience. But on further questioning, I realised that these young women were as time poor as older women are in society now. And it wasn't like it was when I was an undergraduate a long time ago, when we seemed to have acres of time, actually. They were working in order to help pay for their studies because it wasn't funded any longer. They had social media to navigate. They had a lot of political interests they were involved with. And they also were at a very high achieving university, and they were often achieving at a very high level within that context. So they were very busy, and convenience was an important value to them. And then this next quote is great because it brings together so many of the issues that they raised. So it saves the menstrual cup saves the planet. It's also convenient, it's cheap. It's everything you want a period to be. And you just sort of go through your period instead of having to stop and think about it. So we're starting to see here the idea that using menstrual cup allows you to forget that you're menstruating. And most of the members of the study spoke about this and said that the thing that was really great about the cup was that they could put it in at the beginning of the day and then just forget they were having a period all day until they got home. Most of them weren't bleeding heavily because they were on hormonal contraception of one sort or another. So a cup would last them easily for 12 hours. And this they experienced as freedom. So freedom was another word that came up. And also in terms of the fact that the cup, unlike any other menstrual product, is completely hidden. So there's no strings, there's no wrappers. Quite a few people spoke about the issue with wrappers making noise in toilets. I don't know whether you come across that, but there's concern about someone might hear the wrapper in the next cubicle. And this quote is very interesting. So there's no just stuff down there, like it was just good. Everything was just away. So it's all tucked away, and it felt like normal. And Shara Vostral actually talks about this in her book, that the non-menstruating body is the normal body, and the menstruating body is abnormal. And then to take that further to Kristeva, it's abject. So this young woman was saying that because everything is tucked away, and she can ignore it, and so it feels like her body is normal. And then there were comments about that surrounded actually seeing the blood, because all other menstrual products absorb the blood. The cup is the only one that collects the blood. And also because it's held in an anaerobic environment in the vagina, when you actually pull the cup out, you see the blood as it actually, it's very fresh and vivid. And everybody talked about what a shock that had been when they first saw it, that they hadn't seen their blood that way before. And they now knew how much the volume of it was, so they felt that they knew their bodies better. And so this young woman says, pads and tampons always kind of inoculate you from your own body in some ways, because you don't really have to deal with the blood in its pre-absorbed form. So the reality of what your body is doing is closer to you. And then some of them actually got quite excited about that and felt that it was an authentic and beautiful experience to see the blood. And it was interesting because this was not a New Age or spiritual group. These were generally quite pragmatic, sensible, rational, ambitious women who were looking to have a mainstream career. And so there tended to be almost a bit of embarrassment about having any kind of emotive experience about the blood. Except for this one, and actually she's an artist, and she was a couple of years out of university, and she spoke about feeling excited about, oh God, what would I do without you? She spoke about feeling excited about looking at the blood and wondering if she could put it on plants and if it had any other use. So, those are some examples. How am I for time? Yeah? So I started looking at this in terms of social goods, because there was a lot of talk about various aspects of the cup as good. A lot of people say, well, the cup's a good thing. It's good for the planet, it's good for me. And there was a combination of social goods that everybody seemed to share, in which forms, I think, a progressive worldview bundle, which would also include veganism, vegetarianism, minimalism, not buying more than you need, cycling, so general sustainability. But it also included some ideas from feminism. And that I think that the fashionable nature of the contemporary politics of sustainability and feminism actually comes together to render the menstrual cup cool. And the coolness means that it now has social capital. So people are unafraid to talk about the menstrual cup. And this is really the first time that a menstrual product has come along or been taken up in this way and has become a vehicle for gaining social capital and sharing information with others freely. But the complication of this is that something that was once private is now shared, and so therefore the opinions of mothers, boyfriends, friends also became a factor in their experience. So one participant, for example, her mother was very concerned about the hygiene of the cup. And so this participant ended up boiling the cup in between every insertion, which made it impossible to use, basically. It was a big burden on her in terms of labour. And she also got very anxious. She got increasingly anxious as the study went on because of her mother's input. Another one's boyfriend was very keen on her using the cup, and even though she had difficulty with the cup, he was saying, no, you've just got to force it in, and you've just got to push through and go for it. And he was her main cheerleader, but on the other hand, there was something rather masculinist in the way of approaching the body and the use of the cup. Another's boyfriend walked into the bathroom, saw the cup, the clean cup, in its little bag, picked it up in the bag and said, what's this, a present for me? And she said, well, no, actually, it's my menstrual cup. And he dropped it and was actually quite upset that she'd left it out so that he had accidentally touched it, even though it was clean and in the bag. So there we get the idea that anything associated with menstruation is still abject, even when it's cool in the idea of it, but the actual artifact itself is still abject. So there was a dual effect from being able to talk about it in public. It meant that they could get support if they had any difficulties with the cup. There were, endless online forums to talk about it. There was a whole cheerleading team on one Facebook feminist group of friends of students. They were all students who would talk to each other, and if someone was having a hard time, the others would go, no, it's okay. Just cut the stem off. Just, fold it up differently. Just keep going. You'll get it, and it's fantastic. So they had a lot of support, but at the same time, it meant there was this vulnerability to other people's opinions, which is really quite new in that, what menstrual product you use used to be pretty much a private affair that you might share with a friend or sisters or perhaps with your mother, but largely wasn't really discussed at all. And then there's also, we see some paradoxes in the idea of convenience as well. So the convenience factor of the cup is very connected to the creation of the good neoliberal female subject who is able to go to work, hold down a busy job, raise her children, sort out the house. She's, superwoman on steroids. And that's the expectation that women will still perform all these extra pieces of labour, including having a menstrual cycle, for free. And this is all given to, the broader economy. So the cup is convenient because it allows women to pass. Those of you who are familiar with Vostral's work will know that she identifies that successful menstruators pass as non-menstruators. And here we've got what she calls the double pass, which is that what I found was that they're passing to themselves as well as to others. So yes, the cup means there's no wrappers making a noise in the toilets. There's no string hanging out of the vagina. They don't have to carry a product when they're at work because it's already inside them. So they haven't got to do an embarrassing run to the bathroom with a tampon in their hand or anything. So they're passing as non-menstruators externally, but also to themselves they're passing as non-menstruators because they don't have to think about it all day. So that's a large part of the cup's convenience. And it also makes menstruating at work easier, so it makes it easier to be this good neoliberal subject who can perform all of these tasks without it looking like she's actually doing all of them. So just to sum up some of the ideas that came up. So menstrual cup use complicates menstrual stigma by both relieving and reproducing conventional associations. It repositions a menstrual product as cool, which is a radical departure from previous menstrual products. It allows users intimacy with their menstrual blood, which is, a big experiential difference, it turns out. Cups offer a sense of freedom, but along with that are also new vulnerabilities. And cups allow menstruation to be simultaneously more secret and more open. And cups allow users to know their menstruating bodies better, yet also to forget them more fully. There's my contact information. Thanks very much, and I'll just open to questions.
Thanks so much for a really interesting presentation of what sounds like a really great study. I was wondering, because obviously there's data you've collected 2017-18, and I was wondering whether, not necessarily academically, but just kind of more holistically, you think anything has changed since then. And I'm asking because the sense I get in the UK is that cup use is accelerating faster and faster, and I just wonder whether you get the sense that that's also happening down under, as it were. Sorry.
It's okay, no, that's funny actually, I hadn't made that connection. Well, I don't have any data on that, so I don't know, but it was certainly, that was the trajectory. It looked like that was where things were heading. And even during the period of the there's so many puns in the menstruation world. During the period of the study, I could see that that was happening. So there are still some barriers. Some of the barriers that people spoke about were not being able to buy cups easily. There were some participants who said they wouldn't have tried one if they hadn't have got it free. That they didn't like buying things online, for example, and they weren't sure whether it would fit, and they were students, so they didn't want to make the investment in a cup. So I think price and availability are issues. Some said that they would buy a cup more easily if you could get it in a supermarket and you didn't have to talk to anyone. So there is still, the effects of stigma are still strong. I think in some ways, stigmatization of menstruation has got worse at the same time as new things have been happening. And certainly the women in my study actually dealt with a lot of stigma, even though they were aware they were in a rarefied environment that was actually very supportive. So yeah, I think it is accelerating. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. It would be logical if it did, because it's a very practical solution to a lot of the issues that women face, especially at work. Yeah?
Yeah, do you know if these cups are usable by young girls at the early days of menstruation, when you know of the impact in a lot of developing countries where not having access to products means that it has a huge negative impact on girls' education?
Well, there's some differing data on that, but that's not what I studied. I specifically wanted to study in a global north westernized context because there's been no work done on that. So I wanted to see, I wanted to explore that. In terms of young women, there's no reason why, if a girl can use a tampon, she can use a menstrual cup. So far, from the research I did, it seemed that women weren't taking up the cup usually until they got to university, and that it's very strong among university students. I do know of a few who started using a cup younger, but it's still considered a bit too much to manage for a younger girl. And of course, in some cultural groups, and certainly in some developing countries, the issue of the hymen is really important. And so cups are seen as not desirable because they'll break the hymen. So that was something that one of my participants spoke about, because she came from a background where her grandmother disapproved of her using the cup for that reason. But she decided, and she loved it, she wanted to use it anyway. So she was breaking that tradition for herself. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see at what point it starts being used by younger and younger girls. Similarly to tampons. Tampons when they first came out weren't used by girls who were, quite soon after menarche. So it'll probably be a similar process to that, I would think.
I've got a question. I was particularly interested in your issue of secrecy and sort of trying to hide the wrapping, not making noises in the toilets, but the openness on social media. And I'm wondering, is there a tension between hiding your bodily functions, but actually the talking about it and talking about the cup and the sort of discourse level does not have to be secret anymore? Would you say that?
Yeah, I do. And I think actually, as I was saying, I think there's social capital accrues to people who talk about it online and who are very open about their bodies. But then in practice, it's different. Like the boyfriend who didn't want to touch the cup in a bag was a supporter of sustainability more broadly. And also his the girlfriend said, he's very kind when I have my period. He'll bring me a hot water bottle and he'll cook me dinner. So there's a performative aspect of being, okay with menstruation, but then there's the actual reality of a product will bring up these old associations of abjection. So there is considerable tension there, yeah. And I think we are in the middle of a huge social change around how menstruation's positioned, so it's not really surprising. Yeah.